You're listening to The Intellectual Investor, episode number 42, interview with Tony Greer, part 2, the Tesla puzzle, crypto, the dollar, and America's bright future. To learn more about Vitaliy's investing firm, IMA, go to imausa.com. This is part 2 of my conversation with investor Tony Greer. In this episode, we discussed the investment puzzle presented by Tesla, whether or not we own Tesla stock at IMA, the automotive industry, America's bright future, and more. I hope you enjoy it.
This does probably relate to another research project that you've worked very diligently on when you say electric cars are the future. So tell me what you think about, we should get a drum roll or something here, but I would love to hear what you think about Tesla.
Okay. So there's a preface to the story.
Go ahead.
I made a reservation for Model 3 in 2015, I think, when they just announced it. Put $1,000. 2.5 years later, I get email that you can go buy your car. So I can't show up to the showroom. They don't have a Model 3 for me to test drive, and the car that I thought was going to cost me $35,000 now, two-wheel drive cost me a lot more, etc. So long story short, I got my $1,000 back, and that was it.
Gotcha.
So 3 months ago, I actually bought Model 3. At this point, a few things changed. The pricing got much better. They came out with a four-wheel drive car, and I was able to test drive it.
Okay.
And so a normal person buys a car, likes it, and just enjoys driving it. So
yeah.
I enjoyed driving it too. But then I sat down and wrote a 37-page article on it. I'm calling it an article probably after 37 pages.
Yeah.
You can't really call it an article anymore, but
it's a short story on Tesla, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a mini book. One thing I realized, electric car is the car of the future.
Yeah.
I didn't say Tesla, that's a different conclusion. But electric car is the car of the future for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a much better vehicle. It's a much faster. It's a much simpler vehicle. The normal car has about, the engine has 5,000 parts, moving parts. It has to be cooled down. There is a lot of oil flowing. There is a lot of gears going out. Yeah. Electric car, the engine does not need oil for the most part. Right. It's a very simple mechanism. Yeah. It has very few moving parts. It doesn't have a radiator. Does not have the complex transmission, all these different things. So it requires a lot less maintenance.
Less resources, right?
Yeah. Less resources. In addition to this, it's aside of all these things, if you're a government, when you have a gasoline car, you basically tie yourself to oil. Yeah. Electricity, could be produced using different resources. Mm-hmm. Today, roughly about 70% of electricity is still produced using basic oil, natural gas, etc. Yes, coal, etc. But now you have choices. You can use nuclear, you could use solar, you can use wind, you can also use hydro. So you have a lot more options. So, and as a technology, electric cars are just superior than gasoline cars. There's no question about it. Aside from environmental benefits, etc., it's a much better technology. Okay,
I can accept that.
So we can accept that. Okay, so now, as I was analyzing Tesla, I was thinking, well, is this the company that's going to succeed? And as I was researching it, speaking of analogies, I realized an analogy that may be happening, that may be transpiring right now. We may be in 2008 or 2009. An iPhone was introduced in 2007. And we may be having this iPhone moment where the General Motors and Fords, etc., they are the Nokias of the world. They own the industry. They own like Nokia was the king of dumb phones.
The traditional platform,
yes,
right?
Nokia was the king of dumb phones.
Yeah.
General Motors is and the others are the kings of
combustible engine.
Dumb cars. Let's call it just to make it the dumb cars. Where electric car is a very different. Even though it looks the same, it's very different inside.
Yeah.
It's the battery. So where in a gasoline car, the engine is the most important part. Where these companies have huge, spend hundreds, probably billions of dollars on R&D. Yeah. All that knowledge, it becomes irrelevant when you go to electric car, because the most important part in electric car is actually the battery. And so just like Nokia has, even though when iPhone came out, Nokia should have looked at Apple and said, "Thank you so much, Apple. Now we know what the future phone would look like."
Right.
That didn't happen, and here's why: because you shifted from one domain to another. It's a shift in domains. It's not just like we introduced just a little bit better dumb phone. Even though smartphones still made phone calls, that was probably the least important part of the device. Right.
And it birthed a new product line entirely, right?
Yes.
Like we're an entire vertical of new products.
Yes, you go from one ecosystem to another. To another.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so when you go from one domain to another, your assets become your liabilities. I'll give you an example. Just think about this for a second. So Nokia had thousands of engineers that were very good at hardware, but it had very few engineers that were specialized in software user interface, right? So think about General Motors. They have thousands of engineers that are so good at designing these very complex engines, which are completely irrelevant in this new domain, where suddenly this big concoction is replaced by this little thing that's commodity. And then when we looked at what happened at there was a General Motors strike, right? That's why you have a strike, because basically employees saying, well, electric cars, you don't need these engines. If you're going to start making these electric engines, we're going to make less money and you need fewer people, and you can automate it more. So those employees went from being assets to become a liability. So these companies, all of them are unionized. So therefore, it's becoming even more difficult to make very drastic changes you need to make.
Yeah.
So one of the takeaways from doing all this research, I realized that even though we today make it's like we assume that every car manufacturer will be able to transition to electric cars successfully. I think I would like to challenge that thesis. I'm not sure that's actually, I'm not saying that's not necessarily going to happen, but I'm saying that's not 100% probability.
Right.
And like if you look at going back to dumb phones analogy, so you had Nokia and Motorola and BlackBerry have failed to make this transition, but then Samsung has done a great job, has benefited from that. So you're going to have winners and losers. Tesla's final outcome, to some degree, will depend on how successful these car companies transitioning from gasoline to electric, and I think that's where So when we analyzed Tesla, Real Vision did a great special Tesla versus Tesla Q.
Yep.
When you analyze Tesla, I can see both sides.
Yeah.
And the naysayers in Tesla, they have a lot of very good points. In fact, I would argue Tesla is a path-dependent company. It's a company that's losing a tremendous amount of money. So for them to its existence basically depends on financial markets, on the kindness of financial markets, right?
Yeah.
If financial markets have the WeWork moment,
right,
and say, you know what?
No more credit.
Right. Then suddenly the stock price collapses, right? And and if you're a Tesla shareholder, you get diluted because they'll be issuing shares at $50 or $30, etc.
Right.
I still don't think Tesla will go bankrupt as that entity, just because it's going to be too valuable for somebody else. It doesn't mean as an equity shareholder you're not going to get spiked out. You won't be down 75%.
Yeah.
But as Tesla as an investment, to me, this is how it looks. I can see the 75% decline if financial markets if financial markets basically stop lending the money before it gets to escape velocity.
Yep.
And if it gets to escape velocity and it actually becomes profitable or starts losing money, I can see that we're making 80 million cars a year today, globally. There is absolutely no reason at that point, and again, this depends on how General Motors and Ford and everybody else responds.
How they pivot.
They can't take market share and start making a couple million cars a year. And if that's the case, you start suddenly see they can make tens of billions of dollars of earnings, and therefore the stock price can go up a lot. So I've done all this work, and I kind of somewhat frustrated, walked away saying, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think this, as an investor, you don't want to look at your sunk cost and then make a decision like I need to buy or short or whatever. Sometimes just you say, well, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I walked away that's obviously saying I probably don't want to buy any gasoline making car today.
Right.
Car company, and say I am gonna do nothing.
Yeah. No, I like it. That's that's the sort of cross that a trader bears, in deciding where you want to put your risk. And sometimes you have to kick all the tires and do all the research, and you come at the end of it and you don't have passion to do anything, right? In the end, you want to decide if it's your money that's worth risking.
Yeah.
And if you would rather have your money in your pocket or in 10 other trades, that's the way it comes down,
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed that analysis because it opened up my eyes to the chance that they could survive even with competition coming into the picture, because that was my big bearish argument. But you explained really nicely how they very well could.
Yeah, and so just one point about Nokia. So
Sure.
what Nokia did, their mistake was they tried to take, instead of starting a brand new company, okay, and giving them a limited amount of capital, saying, go disrupt us.
Yeah.
Okay, where you have a new CEO who can hire anybody he wants. He has a blank piece of paper and say, create a new smartphone. The Nokia, what they tried to do, they tried to take the dumb phone and stretch their Symbian operating system into it, which was a dumb phone operating system. And if you look at the initial efforts of General Motors, that's what they did, right, with bolts and volts. That's what they're trying to do. And people who drove, so I haven't driven the new electric cars that were made by Jaguar or General Motors,
right.
But the feedback I read about was that it drives very well because they at the core is the electric engine,
Right.
But the software still feels like it's the software that's in the
Still
old
lagging.
cars. Yes,
Really?
yes.
Interesting.
Where Tesla's software is now, as a Tesla owner, I've been lucky. They had a lot of production issues,
Right.
but I've been lucky that I had a phenomenal car.
Right.
I haven't had any problems, and unlike others, I had great customer service when the car broke, etc.
Right.
When I had little issues come up, and I can see how it's a car that was designed based on first principles, where you basically, Warren Buffett would call it what would Martians do? When you don't have the baggage. When you don't have a baggage from a different industry, we just literally have a blank
right.
piece of paper
Blank
and say,
slate, right.
yes. And if you look at the Tesla for a second, the way the car was designed, so if you have a gasoline car and you want to make it four-wheel drive, you basically have to take the power from the engine and extend it to rear wheels.
The other
right?
axis, right?
Yeah. So by doing it, you actually lose power.
Mm-hmm.
In an electric car, and if you were designing, if you were General Motors and you were designing a car today, you probably would do the same thing with the electric engine. Well, Tesla did not have the baggage, so they said, well, actually, we don't need to do this.
Yeah.
We just, the engine itself is not very expensive. It doesn't weigh as much.
Right.
So we're literally just going to put an engine on each axle. That's how they turn a car into four-wheel drive. Just think about it. That's a very different thinking.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is tremendous. Well, I appreciate you proving that point all the way through, Vitaliy. That's a really interesting story. I want to pivot to hear what you think about a few other things before we finish up. Do you think cryptocurrency is going to have a place in the macro world's future and or as an investable idea?
Think about this. It's really a question of what is money.
Yeah.
Okay. Money is a story. The dollar bill, the holding, does not exist in nature. Okay, It's a story that when you're 5 years old and you went with your father to buy milk, and he gave $5 to. That's a story that you basically learned, by observing others.
It works.
It works, right? And we all believe that money is just that piece of paper.
Right.
Is money.
It has credibility for now.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. For now.
Yeah.
And it's universally accepted. So gold, you can argue. The gold bull would argue been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so a larger portion of people buy into that story.
Yep.
Cryptocurrencies are kind of they try to compete with gold. In fact, I would argue that it's the kind of the new generation, the millennials, embrace it because they're not into fancy shiny things.
Right.
Right. And it's so much more convenient. If I gave you $1 million in gold, it was weighing, I think, like 45, 50 pounds. So
right.
you would have to make sure to work out.
Right.
Before,
right. Yeah.
Okay, with cryptocurrency, I can give you $1 billion on a stick, right? So it kind of makes sense on the surface. The problem is, from a money perspective, where it gets difficult is that even though people say Bitcoin is finite, but number of Bitcoins is not. So if you want to create Bitcoin number 2 or number 500, you can still do this. So
right.
is Bitcoin going to be the one that's surviving? So when you make a bet on cryptocurrencies, the first bet you have to make, which one?
Right.
And so let's say you solve that, and let's say that's Bitcoin. Okay. Then another question is, will the governments allow that to happen? And this is where it gets very tricky. Our democracy basically depends on our politicians making promises that they won't keep. Okay, and that means we have inflation. And that means that is, I guess you can argue that inflation is at the core of social stability. Okay, if you take that away from a government, then that's a very important carrot the governments don't want to lose. So I think we saw in Israel and South Korea, the governments outlawed Bitcoin. And there might have been other reasons for that as well. But the point is, Bitcoin, the cryptocurrencies take away government's ability to print money or to make promises they won't keep.
Right.
And I think that's an enormous headwind that lies against cryptocurrencies.
Right. The uncorruptible factor
Yes.
is what the central banks want to campaign against because they want to maintain control of the money supply.
Yeah. And then also, since it fluctuates so much, how do you, like I think, with Brexit, there was a Brexit in the news and you see pound going up or down, but it goes up like 30 basis points.
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. And cryptocurrency goes up
30%.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, as a money perspective, how much you and I agreed on the price as of when?
Right. How much can we tolerate? How much risk can we tolerate in the price?
There are a lot of factors. And at the core, we have to believe in the story.
Yeah.
For that to become a currency, everybody has to buy into a story. If you live in Zimbabwe, some kind of banana republic in Africa, then I get it. I completely get it. It's a better alternative than
whatever currency they use.
whatever currency they have.
Right.
In the developed countries, the way I would look at it is that I would put as much money into it as you would spend in Las Vegas when you go gambling. That's
my exact analogy that I've used before. I call it I have blackjack money invested in the cryptocurrency markets.
So that's exactly what I would do.
Yeah, makes sense.
Where gold, I could see that to be a position, and this is a very important point to make.
Yeah.
So gold bugs, people who really believe in gold, some of them put 40-50% of portfolio into gold. I would not do this.
Right.
I would look at it as a position. Like, I don't know, like from 1 to 3%, maybe, I don't know. Like as a position in the portfolio.
Yeah.
But it should not be the portfolio.
Not an overweight. Right?
Yeah. And 50% is not even overweight. I don't even know how to describe that.
Right. I know what you're saying.
Yeah. But crypto should be in basis points. And this is like
smaller allocation.
Yeah, it's a gambling money. Like as a professional investor, I would not touch it. But if you are watching this and you're like, well, it's solid. If you're looking for excitement and you don't have money and you don't want to go to Vegas, own some crypto.
It's true. It used to be silver, now it's cryptocurrency, right?
Yes.
That's exactly right. Oh, that's great. So on a global perspective, we have had the president and his protectionist policies are obviously dramatically redoing the trade calculus around the globe. We're heading into an election year. Do you have any thoughts on it in election 2020 here in the U.S.?
You save the easy questions for the end, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where I say I'm trying to look past that. Okay, and maybe I'm kind of the problem with this question is that basically first of all I need to it's forced me to predict who's going to win, which I have no idea, right? But the way I look at it, maybe it's very naive. I'm basically, no matter who is going to be in power and if they're elected person or not, United States has a very good track record to survive no matter who runs the country. And maybe this is, again, this is idealistic, maybe because I've seen so much worse and grew up in Soviet Russia, and so maybe there's an optimism in me. But I feel like we can survive no matter who's in power.
Yeah.
And so I still would bet, if I had to make a bet on a country, it would still be the bet in the United States.
Yeah, that's a great point.
In general. So I try to think, how would it, if you have a very, somebody on the very right and very left come in power, how would it impact the portfolio, and try to make little tweaks.
Yeah.
But overall, my long-term bet was still, no matter who is in power, you're still gonna have this healthy conflict.
Yeah.
That you're gonna have some kind of gridlock. So even like if you think about it from Obamacare perspective to healthcare stocks, it still was not as draconian as people feared. And actually, at the end, if you look at what happened to health insurance stocks, they quadrupled since.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm basically betting long term that we as a country will, no matter who's in power, will plow through that.
I love it. And that is a sort of, I agree with that 100%, that we are still going to be the best and most attractive investment center for your dollar and the safest place to put your dollar. And it also dovetails with my theory that, I'd like to hear yours first. What do you think about the dollar? Do you participate in this this intense boxing match over whether the dollar is going to retain its reserve currency, or do you do like I do and sort of just abstain and just say, look at the charts and say the dollar looks pretty stable to me and I can't get bearish because of the reasons that you just described, that we should be still the best investment center on the planet. So tie that up in a bow for us.
All right. So think about reserve currency. Let's say we can argue today that Swiss may have let's say Switzerland has a better economy than we do, more stable, etc. Okay, but it's a very small country, so it can be a reserve currency because for reserve currency, you basically need several things. It has to be a very large economy. It has to be stable. You have to have a stable political system.
Yeah.
Okay. If those so once you kind of impose this criteria, we realize you have very few countries left.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
Russia is not going to be one.
No.
And maybe I don't know. And maybe
the ECB is not going to be one, right?
Exactly. So we are the best house in a bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a good house. It's just better than others, right?
Agreed.
And that's what the reserve currency that's why the dollar is is still most likely going to be the reserve currency, because at the end of the day, we are still the most stable democracy out there, and we are the largest economy, etc. So from that perspective, my bet would be on a, long term. I don't know where the dollar is going to be next year, etc. Right. But in the long run, I still think fee are it. And if think about China, could China could possibly be the reserve currency? The problem is it would cripple the economy. There is a great benefits having reserve currency, but there's the downsides too, because it drives your currency up. And if you're trying to become an exporter, then that becomes a headwind to the economy. Yep. So China, and also can you really have a reserve currency in a country where you don't have a free flow of capital? You probably can't.
Absolutely.
And where the price of currency is fixed.
There is that argument as well, for sure. I'm sticking with the dollar strength argument. I don't think that China might be able to price some commodities in yuan and renminbi, but I don't think that it's going to derail the dollar at any point. Especially like you said, China debt is exploding and China defaults are also exploding alongside it. So it doesn't look like a really tempting currency to dive into at the moment. To wrap it up, Vitaliy, that was an outstanding full scrub of all of the topics I wanted to cover. I really enjoyed all of your sort of accountable arguments because they rhyme very much with mine. And even though we hadn't met before, we came across a lot of common ground. And I really look forward to doing some more work with you in the future. That was a great interview.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Vitaliy.
Thank you, Tony.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Vitaliy as much as I did. You can hear from him on a more regular basis if you go to his website, www.contrarianedge.com. You can subscribe to his newsletter, learn more about him, and hear more about his products. I highly recommend it. For Real Vision and for TG Macro, this is Tony Greer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. This and other investment articles by Vitaliy Katsenelson are based on value investing principles that were first brought down from the mountain by Benjamin Graham and later were popularized by Warren Buffett. To learn more about these principles, visit investor.fm and listen to the first episode of this podcast titled The 6 Commandments of Value Investing. To learn more about how Vitaliy's investment firm uses these principles to create low-risk, long-term oriented portfolios, visit imausa.com. Enjoy life and prosper.